Hi, everybody. This is Dale Branda from Stewart Advisors, and welcome to today's webinar, 10 Key Questions for Successful Retirement Planning. There we go. Our presenter today will be my colleague, Tim Obendorf. Tim founded Stewart Advisors and has been working with families and individuals for more than 20 years. He's a veteran of many conversations about retirement planning through all types of economic conditions. So he's a pretty good one to take us through today's key questions. As a financial planning and investment firm, it's our mission to help individuals, families, and business owners realize their goals and make good financial decisions. We provide a range of services, as you can see, and we want to help our clients develop a consistent financial plan. As we work with clients over time, we get a lot of different questions about retirement and retirement planning. And a lot of these boil down to the same issue, which is, am I going to run out of money? Now, sometimes the question gets spun a little differently, like how much do I need in order to retire? But it's a pretty straightforward question at the root. Of course, the answer varies widely depending on the person and many factors. So what we're going to try to do today is look at some key questions that you should be asking yourself and give you a methodology for answering that question for yourself and your family. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Thanks, Dale. The first question that sets the stage for retirement planning is, when will you retire? And a second closely related question is, when will your spouse retire? Even more fundamental than when is a definition of what does retirement mean to you. And at Stewart, we define retirement as having achieved a state where you no longer have to work for income. Now, you still might continue to work, but just because you retire from your career doesn't mean you may not want to have the social and financial advantages of working in retirement. When you do stop working is actually a separate question from when you may claim Social Security. In fact, you may claim Social Security while you're still working, or you may stop working long before you claim Social Security. Claiming Social Security is really a financial decision that's based on your financial situation and may have nothing to do with when you stop working. And then finally, this timing issue may be impacted by how you will achieve medical insurance coverage in retirement. We're going to talk more about financing medical expenses later in the presentation. But sourcing medical insurance may be one of the biggest factors in the timing of retirement. Now, even if you have a perfect date figured out for when you're going to retire, I want to give you a word of caution that your expected retirement date and when you actually retire may not be the same. And here's some data we have. On the left-hand side, it's data from Gallup. And what it shows you is that on average, people are expecting to retire at age 66, but when they actually retire is actually closer to age 62. Now, it's interesting if you see kind of the historical pattern here. The red line is when people expected to retire. The blue is when they actually retire. That's been trending up over the past 10 or 15 years. So retirement age is getting later, but it's pretty consistent that people tend to actually retire earlier than they expected. Now, the data on the right-hand side shows you some of this information in a little bit different split. So the dark line is showing you, the dark blue line is showing you when people retired. If they retired earlier than retirement, that's the dark blue line. The light blue line is they retired about when they expected to. And the red line is they retired earlier or later than what they expected to. So what you can see is that very few people retire later than expected, but about half of people retire earlier and about half of people retire when they expect. So the best laid plans may not exactly work out as you thought. Now, there are three primary reasons that people end up retiring earlier. The first one is you may lose a job due to downsizing or some other career change. And so folks that lose a job near their retirement age often decide to retire earlier than they expected. Alternatively, you may have a health problem that prevents you from continuing to work. So those two items or reasons are kind of negative decisions as far as your timing of retirement. The third is actually kind of positive, and that's that some people get close to retirement and their financial situation ends up a little bit better than they expected, and so they can accelerate when they actually retire. Now, second key retirement question is, where will you live in retirement? Where you retire is going to impact more than whether you see mountains or beach from your front porch. If you move, you may have to reconstruct and rebuild your social network and your service providers. So think about, the doctors that you go to, the dentist, simple things like where you get your hair cut. Rebuilding that network is a bigger deal than you may expect going into retirement. And moving to a different location, a different state in particular, may have tax implications. And not just taxes, but there are other costs that are significantly different depending on where you live. So, as you can imagine, New York City and Hawaii are significantly more expensive than some rural locations like South Dakota. And related to where you live is what type of housing you live in. So, do you want to continue to maintain a single family home that has a yard and you need to hire somebody to plow the driveway in the wintertime? Or do you want to have a condo or something simpler that you can just lock the door and leave and go on vacation and not worry about? Other factors in where you live can be the healthcare availability. As you can imagine, rural Alaska has much less healthcare infrastructure than Chicago and New York and other big cities. Think about the quality of life and the activities that you'll be able to do in whatever geography you live. So if it's warmer weather, you may be able to be outdoors more. Are there other activities like cultural activities? A lot of university settings have lots of cultural activities that are fairly inexpensive that you may want to take advantage of. Now, here we've got a couple lists of best places to live, and one is basically, the one on the left is the tax-friendly states. And this is from a Kiplinger's article that was in January this year. And these are the top 10 tax-friendly states. And then the list on the right is a little bit different. It's the best places to retire, and this is from a US News article. And that included things like the happiness of local residents, housing affordability, healthcare quality, and it also included the tax rates. Now, interestingly, of the best places to live, 7 of them are in Florida. And if you look on the left-hand side, Florida doesn't make the top 10 tax-friendly states. And it's actually a pretty tax-friendly state, but when you consider things like sales tax and real estate tax, it's in kind of the next tier below these top 10 tax-friendly states. Now, as you dream about your retirement, you're probably picturing certain activities that you'd like to pursue. Now's a good time to start to prioritize the activities and estimate the costs and the resources that it's going to take to do those things. And those activities could include hobbies and travel, it may be volunteer work or even paid work. Unfortunately for most of us, you probably won't have enough time or money to do everything on your list. So we suggest that you prioritize and sequence the pursuits that you want to do in retirement. And by sequencing, what I mean there is that some activities, especially if they're very physical activities, let's say you're an active traveler and one of your dreams is to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Well, that's an activity that you should sequence early in your retirement, where there might be other activities that you want to sequence later in your retirement. So just, hanging out with friends and family, that's something you can do as you have more difficulty getting around. Now, many of those activities and much of your happiness in retirement is going to depend on your health. And now is the time to start good health habits like eating right and exercising. You may also want to consider the healthcare resources in any community that you plan to retire to. Beyond just physical health, I think it's really important to think about social and spiritual health in your retirement situation. So who are the people that you're going to surround yourself with and spend time doing activities with? And if having a faith community and being involved in a faith community is important to you, that's something that you should consider now and develop long before retirement. One website that we want to point out here that we find pretty interesting is livingto100.com. And you can spend a few minutes on that, fill out a survey, and the results that it will spit out for you give you a sense of what your life expectancy should be based on your health situation. Now, beyond just kind of giving you an estimate of whether you're going to live, shorter or longer than average, it also gives you a few activities that you can do to increase your life expectancy. So check that out. Later on, we're going to have a page of resources that we'll share with you, so that'll be on that resources page. But if you get a chance, if you have 10 or 15 minutes and you're curious about that, it's a website we recommend. Beyond just maintaining your health, you have healthcare directives in place, and we've already mentioned the resources in the community. Unfortunately, even the most healthy retirees will eventually have growing medical expenses. And so you need to have a strategy to figure out how are you going to fund those medical expenses. And if you retire before age 65, it gets more complicated because one of the big household expense items is health insurance. And if you're no longer getting that from your employer and you're not eligible yet for Medicare, you need to fill that gap with some kind of medical coverage. And there's various options for that. Some options include taking COBRA from your former employer or buying insurance through the ACA marketplace. One tool that you can use to save for medical expenses is a health savings account. And this type of account has a triple tax advantage. And what I mean by that is when you make a contribution into the health savings account, you get a tax deduction. So that's advantage number one. While the funds are in the health savings account, you can invest them. And so as you earn and grow that account, that growth is actually tax-free. So that's tax advantage number two. And then the third tax advantage is when you withdraw the funds, if you use them to reimburse for health expenses, that withdrawal is tax-free. This is a very advantageous plan. I encourage you, if you're able to take advantage of it, to start early and save in a health savings account. Now, once you are eligible for Medicare, you're going to have a menu of options that starts with choosing whether you're going to use a traditional Medicare plan or a Medicare Advantage plan. And without going into a lot of detail there, a traditional Medicare plan is kind of an indemnity plan that reimburses you, where a Medicare Advantage plan is more like an HMO. And on top of the regular medical expenses, you're going to want to plan for the cost of long-term care. And the various strategies for coping with long-term care costs could range from self-insuring to purchasing a long-term care policy to something that's become even more popular recently is a hybrid life insurance policy where the policy allows you to tap into the death benefit for covering long-term care expenses. There's so many different details we could go into related to healthcare and healthcare expenses. And if you'd like to dig deeper into that, we have a a separate webinar we did a little while ago. It's an Ask the Expert webinar, and the whole topic was on healthcare coverage. So you can find that on our website. Now, another resource that we'd like to point you to is Vanguard's Healthcare Cost Estimator. And using just a little bit of data, they're able to give you an idea of what your healthcare costs will be. And this is an example using an actual couple. And here it's a couple, they're retiring at age 65. They don't have any salary income in retirement. The wife in this case has low healthcare risk. The husband has medium healthcare risk. And we can plug that into pretty simple input in Vanguard's website and add that information in. And they even have some definitions of what low risk and medium and high risk are. So you can look at things like how many times you go to the doctor a year, or are you a smoker? So things like that will factor into your healthcare risk. Now, once you've input all that information, it gives you some estimates of what your costs will be, both for annual healthcare costs, but also it gives you some idea of what long-term care costs would be for you. And it breaks it up into different percentiles. And what we mean by the 50th percentile is we expect 49% of the population to actually have lower costs than the 50th percentile costs that are listed here. Same thing with the 75th percentile. That means that 74% of the population would have lower costs than what's in this blue column. Now, I find it kind of interesting that in long-term care costs, over half of the population isn't even expected to have long-term care costs in their retirement, but the costs ramp up. So if you're kind of on the extreme where you incur some long-term care costs and maybe are in long-term care for quite a while, for a couple that could approach almost $400,000. So planning for that and figuring out how you're going to finance that is going to be it's going to be available to so something that is important for you to plan and have a successful retirement and be able to do the other things that you want to do. Now, healthcare costs are one major component of retirement finances, but we need to step back and take a look at your overall financial picture. And let's start by identifying sources of income. And as you go through your sources of income, this will give you a basis for many of the other decisions that you're going to make in retirement. Having diversified income sources will help you weather various economic and tax regimes. And the types of income you have will also give you a sense of how risky or how much financial risk you have in your retirement plan. So for instance, if all of your income is from a pension and Social Security, there's pretty low risk to that retirement income going away. On the other hand, if all of your income is from an investment portfolio, you have to plan around a little bit more risk, more potential variance in the outcomes of your income in retirement. Many retirees will have a lump sum income. So you might have a sale of a business or an inheritance, and that requires some increased planning. And we added a bonus question here about if you own a business, just because owning a business raises a whole set of other questions that we don't have time to address in this webinar. We consult with a lot of business owners on how to transition from owning a business into retirement. And we'd be happy to discuss that offline with you if that's your case. In one example, we worked with a couple about 3 years before they sold their business and did some planning to give them a sense of, at different sale price levels for the business, how would they be able to do the things that they wanted to do in retirement. And so 3 years later, when they did sell the business, we invested the proceeds from that sale And right now they're on track for 100% success rate in retirement. And so that planning ahead of time gave them a sense of what kind of sale price they needed, and they could have some confidence in transitioning out of their business. One other income source that almost everybody will receive, but very few people understand, is Social Security. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail here on Social Security, but I wanted to give you a sample benefit statement. And this is something that you can get for yourself. If you log into ssa.gov and set up an account, you can access your own Social Security benefit estimate. And I would encourage everybody to do that if you haven't already. So not only will there be some good information there for you, but it's also one of the best ways to reduce identity theft risk. So set up your account, pull this data down. And if you want to delve into more information about Social Security, again, we've done a full webinar on this topic. So access our website, and you can view that webinar if that's something that you want to drill into in more detail. There's just so many moving parts in Social Security that it would take more time than we have here today to go into it. Now, one question that we get a lot is, how will your expenses change in retirement? And so this is kind of the flip side of estimating your income, is estimating your expenses. And what we find is that a good starting point is what your current expenses are. Most people don't change their lifestyle significantly in retirement. You may reduce your taxes, and you may reduce some of your savings, but you're typically going to increase some spending on things like travel and your hobbies like golf. Over time, though, when you get into kind of the middle retirement years, what we find is you've traveled enough, you've played enough rounds of golf, those types of expenses start to decline. And it's not until later in retirement when expenses begin to ramp up again as your healthcare costs increase. This graph on the right-hand side is from a Morningstar study. And this is kind of a typical pattern that applies. They found it applied across all kinds of income spectrums. So, what they're showing here is for people that only spend $25,000 a year, the blue line had this smile pattern. People that spend $100,000 a year, the green line had the same sort of pattern. So expenses are a little bit higher earlier in retirement, they decline, and then they increase again later in retirement. That happens regardless of what kind of spending level you start out with. Now, after reviewing your income and your expenses, you might find that you don't have as much cushion as you hoped for. Even if you do, you might want to look at tax strategies that can improve your financial condition. Common tax strategies include moving to a low tax state, doing Roth conversions, doing tax efficient charitable giving, making strategic gifts to your family, and managing the location of your investments between tax-free, tax-deferred, and taxable accounts. The table on the right highlights a planning opportunity that we often see with retirees. In early years of retirement, income may be significantly lower than before you retire. So there's often a window after you no longer have a salary, but before you take Social Security and before you have to start taking required minimum distributions, where your income is low and you're in a low tax bracket. What that presents is an opportunity in low tax years to actually defer tax from your pre-retirement days. You could use something like a deferred compensation program to do that, or to accelerate income into those early retirement years by doing Roth conversions. A few years ago, we began working with a couple that had a projected retirement success of 75%, which wasn't, it's not terrible, but by identifying the opportunity to do a series of Roth conversions and doing some tax planning and adjusting their portfolio risk, we were able to increase their success rate to over 80%. So what that that may not seem like a huge change, but what that means is that it reduced their chance of running out of money or of having to alter their expenses from 25% down to 20%. So that's a 20% difference in the chance of running out of money or having to alter their spending. And they were able to improve their success rate without doing any changes to their lifestyle. Now, as you age, you're going to find that not only do you need to rely on others for medical, but also for financial issues. And I hate to say this, but our cognitive abilities begin to decline in our mid-20s. And that's somewhat offset by experience, but when you put that together, experience offset by your cognitive decline, your financial competency peaks in your 50s and begins to decline every decade after that. So it's important that you identify people that you trust, both about medical issues and also about financial decisions. And if you identify those people, you should document them. So use medical powers of attorney, medical directives, and financial powers of attorney to allow those trusted advisors to be able to talk to your healthcare providers and your financial institutions. And for instance, if something happened to you and you were in the hospital and not able to pay your bills, your trusted relative or friend who has a healthcare or has a property power of attorney could pay those bills for you. Now, the final question we have here is whether you want to leave a legacy to your family or to a charitable organization. And if there are loved ones in your family that are financially depending on you, you might need to do some more sophisticated estate planning. And if there are causes that are important to you, incorporating those causes into your estate plan is a great way to leave a legacy. And it's a great way to transmit your values to your family members. Now, as you can see, all of these 10 questions lead to a number of other questions. And many of those things interrelate. So all these planning issues can be overwhelming, and that's one reason that we recommend that you have a written retirement plan, and that it's something that you can update periodically as life changes and will allow you to anticipate opportunities to take advantage of planning strategies and give you a sense of whether you're on track for retirement. If this is something you're interested in, we'd be happy to work with you. Just reach out to us through the Q&A, and we'd be happy to contact you about doing a retirement plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dale for some Q&A, and he's going to give you instructions on that.
Thanks, Tim. So we are reaching our time limit, but we do have a couple of questions that have been submitted. Those of you in the audience, you can still submit some questions using the Q&A button on your screen. If we don't have time to answer everything, we'll get back to you offline. I also want to, while you're doing that, let you know that we have a resource guide that we put together that has all of the links that in Tim's presentation. All the links, including the Vanguard Healthcare Estimator, are available to you. They're not advisor specific, so you can use them on your own. And we'll get you a copy of that along with the presentation to everybody who registered. So you don't have to worry about scribbling everything down right now. And last but not least, you can always feel free to contact us offline if we have questions, if you have questions that come up after the presentation or that we didn't answer. So with that, we do have a couple that were submitted. And Tim, the first one is someone inquiring about the 4% rule and what we think of that. And it may be good, before you answer that, to just step back and explain for those who may not know what the 4% rule is, kind of how that works.
Yeah, well, in retirement planning, there are a number of rules of thumb. And those are just kind of shortcuts to give you a sense of whether you're on track or not. The 4% rule was developed by a financial advisor named Bill Bengen back in the early 90s. And what he did is he looked at historical market returns and said, what's the maximum amount that you could pull out of a portfolio every year and be able to make sure that you had enough money to last 30 years. So his assumption was he'd retire at age 65, you need to have income until you're age 95, and what's the maximum amount with 100% certainty that you could pull out of a portfolio. And based on historical data, the maximum amount he found was 4%. Now, there are folks that are questioning, given low interest rates today and other, factors in the economy, does that still make sense? And what I would say is that's kind of a good, just rough starting point. If you're wondering, okay, I have a portfolio X, X size portfolio, how much income can I generate? That's kind of a starting point. But most people's lives are a little bit more complex than just pulling out the same amount of money every year. And that's where doing some planning, building a cash flow model, doing some stress testing can actually give you a better sense of how much your situation, how much income your situation supports.
Okay, let's do one more question. This is something we hear a lot in retirement planning. And the question is, do you recommend that individuals take Social Security at age 67 or whenever they reach full retirement age, or is it better to wait until age 70?
Yeah, so, one of the big decisions related to retirement is when you take Social Security. And, on average, people tend to take it as early as they can. So you can start taking Social Security at age 62. Most people right now, your full retirement age when you get the full benefit is age 67. And if you wait up to age 70, your benefit increases. Now, when you combine life expectancy into kind of a present value of Social Security benefits, what we find is that there's not a significant difference between whether you take Social Security at your full retirement age or at age 70 or even a few years earlier than that. The net present value difference when you take life expectancy into account is not significantly different. Now, there may be some reasons that you want to delay. So for instance, if your family has a history of longevity and you're healthy and you think you're going to live longer than average, then probably it would be worthwhile to delay taking Social Security. But again, it becomes very specific to each individual that we look at. We have some tools to analyze that, and we'd be happy to do that if you have further questions on it.
Okay, well, that is about all the time that we have today. We appreciate everyone joining us today, and we look forward to being with you again at our next webinar event. So with that, we will bid you all adieu, and thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone.